Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, December 16th, 2024, and today we're going to talk about days to maturity, the real cost of starting a market garden, and how to connect to other growers in your area. So let's do it. All right, I hope everyone had a nice weekend. You're never going to believe what I did. I watched soccer, and I played some soccer, and read a ridiculous number of articles. I'm pretty predictable these days. And I love to read articles, just specifically good long-form journalism. And I don't read a lot of farming articles over the weekend. I do that mostly during the week for the show, although I went down a huge rabbit hole this weekend about the maple industry. With that in mind, whatever happened to the high-density plantation method of maple production? Anything ever come of that? There's very little recent info that I could find, but I'm not super plugged into the maple production scene, so please enlighten me, commenters. Anyway, yeah, I like reading a diversity of different articles over the weekend because I think it's incredibly hard to have any perspective about farming or the world if you only study or read about farming. For instance, I read a whole article in The Athletic about how people were using CT scanning machines to determine what was inside of packs of Pokemon and sports cards. How could I not be a better farmer after that? Right? Anyway, as promised, I want to keep pecking away at certain aspects of crop planning. And so just in case you missed it, I laid out a basic crop planning strategy on Friday where you effectively work backwards from what you want to harvest. That'll let you know when to plant. Like if I know I want a certain lettuce for an August 1st harvest, then I need to work my way back from there roughly 60 days to know when I need to start that lettuce. For today, though, I thought I would talk about days to maturity, or DTM, which is that little number you see on your seed packets and how that works. I will also cover growing degree days, GDD, at another time, which is a more accurate way to determine how long a crop will take to mature, but it is also a bit more complicated. And you also kind of need to understand days to maturity to appreciate growing degree days. But also there is a lot of value in knowing days to maturity and understanding what it means. Okay, so to back up, days to maturity is what seed companies use on their seed packets to tell you roughly how long it will take to grow something. You can find this number on the seed packets or on the site, whatever, next to whatever crop you're searching for. Not every variety of the same crop has the same days to maturity. There are fast cabbages and slow cabbages, 60-day carrots and 80-day carrots. If you sow that carrot with the 60 days to maturity label on it on June 1st, will you absolutely harvest it on July 31st, 60 days later? Well, maybe, but also maybe not. It could be a week in either direction before that crop is ready to harvest, depending on a number of factors, including sunlight and water and heat and all those things. So that's not necessarily the value of days to maturity. The value of days to maturity is twofold. First, it gives you a general idea of how fast or slow that crop is to mature and how it may differ from another crop in the same species, like cabbages. Some market cabbages can be labeled as 85 days to maturity or more, whereas cabbages like Napa cabbage can be closer to 50 days or less. So maybe you have a short season wherever you are and don't have a ton of space, but want some sort of cabbage on your market table, then a Napa cabbage may make more sense because it's just a faster growing crop, as evidenced by its days to maturity. Or perhaps you want a succession of carrots. Then maybe you sow a 60-day carrot, a 70-day carrot, and an 80-day carrot all at the same time. That way you don't have to prep and sow carrot beds multiple times. Instead, you can prep all the carrot space all at once, sow it all at once, but harvest it over the course of several weeks as the 60 days mature, the 70 days mature, and then the 80-day crop matures, and then it's ready to go. That's a time saver for sure, being able to plant them all at once, and days to maturity allows you to see roughly which crops would work best for that. When using days to maturity for your own calculations, keep in mind that DTM are calculated at peak season for that crop, so add some extra time to days to maturity in the spring and fall as crops will slow down as temperatures and sunlight decrease. Also, when using it for your own calculations, know that the days to maturity refers to the number of days in the garden. So for instance, you will be directly sowing radishes and carrots, but what about peppers and eggplant and tomatoes that are transplanted into the garden after some time in the greenhouse? Well, those days to maturity refer to after transplant. That's how they are generally calculated by the seed companies. So for crops that are generally directly seeded, the DTM, the days to maturity, refers to the days to mature from the sowing of the seed. For crops that are generally transplanted as baby plants, the DTM refers to the days to maturity from transplanting into the garden. What is meant by maturity? Well, maturity refers to the first harvest. So that is a little subjective, right? Because if you're harvesting baby carrots, maybe you want to harvest a week or two earlier than full-blown carrots or smaller radishes or whatever it may be. For some crops like lettuce, the seed purveyor may list days to maturity for baby leaf and then days to maturity for full-blown heads. Now, perhaps obviously, your own notes will help you nail down what the actual DTM is for a crop in your context, because shade, weather, climate, clouds or smoke, temperature, growing conditions, moisture, pests, compaction, and basically everything else will determine how fast a crop grows, more than just what the seed packet says. Days to maturity is simply a starting point. Anyway, I hope that sheds a little light on how that works. Up next, let's get a Patreon question. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making NOP-compliant living soils for organic growers. Everything from Tilth is compost-based, and they divert around 4,000 tons of food scraps from landfills each year. I have used Tilth Soil for several years now for my plant starts. I love the results. I get consistent germination and consistent growth, plus excellent customer support. It's a lovably nerdy cast of folks who run Tilth. So start your season with excellent germination and strong transplants. Check out Tilth's pre-sale pricing for the 2025 season at tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com, and click Farmers. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider joining the nearly 850 people who support it over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, and I'll even answer your question, like a personal consultation live on air. Yeah, except for I record them and then I put them up later. Anyway, today's Patreon question comes from Phoebe Wellborn, great name, and I may have even said it wrong, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, thanks so much for the awesome YouTube videos. I recently discovered your content and just ordered your book and joined the community here on Patreon." Thanks, Phoebe. Phoebe writes, "I'm trying to connect with no-till growers using cover crops on 10 to 20 acres in Southern California. I'm beginning to think none exist. I've tried every Facebook group I can think of, reached out to my local farm bureau and the UC Davis Extension office. Nothing. Any suggestions? Thank you." End quote. Okay, so great question, Phoebe, and I appreciate all the support as well. This is really a question about how to find and connect to people doing roughly the same thing you are in your area, and that is not always easy, as Phoebe has illustrated here. But for anyone feeling similarly, here are a few things you can do to meet like-minded growers trying similar things in your area. Whatever that area might be. First, get in touch with your local ag organizations, not just the extension agents, especially the ones who are working on organic, ecological things. I was in Southern California last April for an event with the folks at Grow Riverside, who held a great conference there, and maybe an excellent resource for connecting you to some of the other farmers in the area who do like-minded stuff. I know there are other organizations down there as well, and more often than not, they know the lay of the land much better than I ever could, and may be aware of farmers who don't have much of a social media presence with whom it may be worth connecting. Conferences in general can be great opportunities to meet folks from your area. I know that there are several in and around the California and Southern California area, usually put on by local ag organizations. These organizations also put on field days, field events on farms throughout the year where you may get an opportunity to go visit some of those small farms in person and make some connections that way. Obviously, don't hesitate to organize your own cohorts around these principles of mid-size, or mid-size to us at least, ecological farming. You may feel alone in your methods, only to find out there are like 20 or 30 other people nearby feeling the same way. Feel free to use the forum at no-tillgrowers.com as well to organize that. And of course, connect with growers in other areas as well, both similar growing regions and not, because you may find more crossover than you think. Like for you, Phoebe, people all along the southern strip of the U.S. have similar growing regions, which is to say very little. You all don't get very much rain. I would happily share some of ours if I could. It's been raining for like 2 days, but unfortunately that's not a thing. Anyway, they would probably be able to share their insight and you can glean something from them. I can't think of a time that I've heard or had a long conversation with a farmer of any scale in any part of the country where I didn't pick up some helpful insight of some sort. To me, when it comes to conferences, I know that I get just as much, if not more, from the mingling aspect of the conference than I do from the actual talks. In fact, it seems like more and more conferences are focusing on having sufficient mingling time between talks and for lunch, plus social hours, than they were a decade ago. And I think that's great. I think in farming, you're often doing, as I've said before on the show, a lot of it just kind of on your own. You don't get to see a lot of other farmers, so getting a bunch of farmers in a room is wildly valuable. Like, that just never happens. So anyway, take advantage of that at conferences. And I'm sure our wonderful comment section will chime in with good ideas as well about how to connect with other people. They're great for that. Anyways, up next, let's talk a little bit about what it costs to start a new farm. But like for real though, like what it really costs. Be right back. Okay, so I was reading through our forum at no-tillgrowers.com this week, and I came across a new post from a user named Andy Christman, who generously breaks down the financial reality of their first year market gardening. And I think it's very helpful for people to see that sort of stuff. So I just want to applaud them for doing that. I really appreciate people taking the time to like actually put some numbers down and show people what it costs. I did not ask to share that post, so I'm not going to detail it here, but I will link it in the show notes. I think if you're starting a market garden, it would be good to go over there and look at that summary to see what it looks like for at least one farm. The link to that forum is in the show notes. What I wanted to talk about, though, is that they estimated their startup cost at around $38,000. And some of you might be like, whoa, that's a lot of money. But here's the thing. It's not. In fact, it's probably low for many market gardens, though sure, it's probably high for others. There, for a while, it was in the 20 teens. I was seeing a lot of start a farm for $2,000 or $500 sorts of content. But here's the thing. $2,000 won't even really cover your market fee and tent and table setup, let alone anything you need to farm. So what I want to do is talk for a minute about things you need to consider. Now, I still firmly believe market gardening can be one of the more affordable businesses to start, but that doesn't mean it costs nothing. Like compared to a restaurant where the ventilation hood alone can cost upwards of $50,000 or more, starting a farm is a steal, but it is still a business. So I'm going to do a quick list of underappreciated costs in starting a market garden business that often come up and will have to be accounted for so they don't surprise you. Also, I know really savvy farmers who are good with paperwork and patient, who get a lot of stuff paid for or partially paid for through grants and other things, which would bring that cost down quite a bit. But anyway, though these are not in any particular order, and I'll let you decide what is more important or what is applicable, some things to have in your enterprise budget for starting a farm are 1, branding and website expenses. It would be hard to get away with not having a website so customers can know that you're actually legit. Sites are fairly easy to build these days, but it'll probably run you around $250 and maybe even more per year, depending on the site you use and development and all that stuff. And if you decide to incorporate an online store, that will have other expenses. Number 2, soil testing and amendments. If you are starting from absolute scratch, you're going to need to know what is in the scratch that you have to start with and potentially have to bring in compost and other amendments to repair the soil. This could be a few $100s or it could be a few thousand, depending on the space and what you need and what you want to buy. Number 3, seed starting costs. Whether you are planning your own greenhouse or planning to buy in plant starts from a nursery, you'll need to know exactly how much that's going to cost. The greenhouse, the trays, the soil mix, all of it. Perhaps you're going to directly seed everything, like in a baby greens farm, in which case you'll need a seeder. I mean, you'll probably need a seeder either way, but you may want to put more money into a better seeder if all you're growing is baby greens or directly seeded crops. So make sure that is on the budget. Number 4, soil management tools. So beyond the initial bed setup, which you could hire a neighbor for or borrow a friend's tractor or whatever, I often say that I could pretty much manage my soil with a wheelbarrow, a shovel, a rake, a stirrup hoe, and a mower. But ideally, you wouldn't have to manage it with that small amount of stuff. I mean, there are times in the middle of the summer that I'm pretty stoked to have a BCS walk-behind tractor. All that to say, even those handful of tools can add up to several $100s. And if you throw the BCS tractor or some other sort of tractor into the mix, you're talking thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So calculate that. Number 5, irrigation and water. Like many of the above, how much this is going to cost you is contextual. If you already have a water source and an easy way to help, tap into that water source, that's going to be much more affordable than if you don't have a well or pond or anything you can use for water. And even if you don't plan to or need to irrigate, like in wetter climates doing dry farming, you will still likely need a way to wash the produce. And honestly, even wet climates have dry periods, so you will likely need some water near the garden and definitely in the greenhouse to water plants, at least some of the time. I've dry farmed and I still dry farm some areas, but I grow things like potatoes and sweet potatoes in dry farmed areas, i.e. lower profit crops that are not my bread and butter that keep me farming. For those crops, like lettuce, my bread and butter, I need irrigation. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay, now number 6, or at least I think I'm on number 6, harvesting tools. The bins and knives, totes, and that sort of stuff that you need to pick up the crops that you harvest in the field. All that stuff can add up in costs, but you may also want to reduce the labor with tools like a quick cut greens harvester for baby greens, and or a garden cart. What is nice with tools, and especially harvest tools, is that you can start out with the bare essentials and then slowly add on the more efficient tools, which will save a lot of money. Okay, number 7, washing and packing stuff. Sinks or wash tubs, scales, hoses, plus the packing materials and coolers to get the stuff where you need it to go. All of those have expenses. You will also want some way to cool stuff off and preserve it, like a walk-in cooler or a series of large fridges. We got our prefab 8x8x9 walk-in cooler at a steal for about $1,400 because it was like in somebody's yard. And our old employee Greg and I had to like take it apart and haul it over piece by piece in a small truck, and it was like the heaviest thing ever. But anyway, and once you have the actual structure of the cooler, you have to cool it down, which for us, we use a large AC unit with a CoolBot, which that combo costs at least $1,000 or more, but is easier to fix than a compressor. Like if you get a compressor, you often have to hire somebody to come fix it. Or like in an emergency, I can just go buy a new AC unit if need be. You could also build these things for cheaper, like build the actual structure perhaps. And some of you may have the carpentry skills to do that, but labor also has to be recorded in those costs, so keep that in mind. Expense number 8, the market supplies and fees. If you plan to do a market, some markets offer different plans, like paying a percentage of your sales, for instance, to the market, and others require a weekly payment, and others still require the full payment up front before the season even starts. Then, of course, a good tent is a couple $100 plus table and any display stuff. Now, signage, tablecloths, all that stuff. Now, you may not be doing a farmer's market, but if you are, expect several $100s in expenses just for the setup. Number 9, they keep going, season extension stuff. So that would be like high tunnels and cat tunnels, obviously, but also row covers and possibly landscape fabrics or shade cloths. The high tunnels can currently be covered here in the U.S. by things like the NRCS high tunnel grants, which will pay for all or most of it. For some of you, those may come right away, like getting the grant. And for others, that can take a year or more to get. And people often correct me that it's not a grant, it's actually a cost share, but so you will have to pay for some of it up front, more than likely, and then the government repays you, but you sign a contract and stuff. Like it's all taken care of ahead of time. And so for some of you, those grants, whatever, can take a year or more to get, and not everyone can wait a year to put up a tunnel, so that can be expensive because you're just going to have to put one up and then hopefully get another tunnel paid for later on. Then there are other random fees, from the cost of incorporation to lawyer fees to taxes, and of course any lease or mortgage expenses, building expenses, insurances, all the things. Maybe you want to be organically certified. Well, that has a few fees as well. They are still currently offering a 75% rebate on the organic expenses for the certification, but it can be slow in coming, like getting that rebate back. And so you'll still have to shell out $250 or $1,000 or more for each scope in the beginning, and wait a few months to a year to get that rebate. Someone recently told me they spent $850 for theirs, which a 75% rebate would mean that they still spent around $213 per scope, which is not bad. I still think for a market farmer, it's worth it, but it is an expense. So anyway, I probably missed some things. And as you can see, it all can add up pretty quickly, and it definitely will add up differently based on your circumstances. But I want to say I'm not diving into this to discourage anyone. Rather the opposite. I want to encourage you to start a farm in a realistic way that leads to actual success. And a lot of these expenses can be spread out over the course of a year or 2 years, so it's not necessarily all upfront, all at once. But starting on a whim, thinking it will just cost a few $1,000s could be exhausting when the expenses keep coming. Better, in my opinion, to be prepared for that. Some people are also going to just be naturally more gifted bootstrappers than others. Some will also be inheriting land versus buying or leasing. All of this will factor in, but it should indeed factor in. What expenses did I miss? Let me know. Otherwise, go enjoy the rest of your Monday. I feel like this episode went long. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer. Show this one again. Big shouts to Dan Brisebois. The Seed Farmer is officially out. Very cool. Pick that up over at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No Till Growers. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of December, you get a big shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Nathan, Michael, Riley Fitzgerald. Oh, that's a fun name. Riley Fitzgerald. Hog Wrestler, Tanner Thompson, Millhouse Barks, and Rick Constantino. And this is a group that was out planting trees in Delaware. And this was a program that they set up to plant a diversity of trees and reforest some parts of Delaware that had been deforested for some reason. And they, what happened was that plot twist, the government forgot they were there and accidentally fenced them in to a restricted area. So it becomes from a nice ecological tree planting story to a suspense thriller where they have to get out from a restricted area. And they also have to discover why it's restricted. And I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but it isn't about maple sugar. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening and/or watching. We'll see you tomorrow.